Welcome to Curiosity Compass, the channel where curiosity knows no bounds. Get ready to explore the wonders of mysteries, facts, and endless discoveries. Step into the mysteries of ancient wonders, where every carving tells a story waiting to be uncovered. To our incredible Curiosity Compass family, thank you for being part of our journey. Your support and curiosity inspire us to keep exploring the unknown. We couldn't do this without you. Let's continue navigating the wonders of the world together. Are you ready to embark on a journey of curiosity and discovery? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to join the adventure.
Welcome to our deep dive into a world where history takes some pretty wild detours. The world of alternate histories.
Alternate histories, yeah. It's a genre where we get to ask those what-if questions and see history unfold in ways we never imagined.
And you've given us some really interesting sources to dive into for this one. We've got a Wikipedia article on alternate history itself. We've got a podcast that explores some specific what-if scenarios, and even an article about how the U.S. Army uses something called counterfactual history in their wargaming.
That's right. A pretty diverse mix of material. And it shows just how far-reaching this concept of alternate history can be.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is alternate history? I mean, the Wikipedia article lays out some key elements like a point of divergence, a change from what actually happened, and then exploring the consequences of that change.
Yeah, those are the building blocks. And it's fascinating to see how writers take those elements and spin them into these incredibly detailed and often thought-provoking narratives.
So it's not just about rewriting history for the sake of a good story. There's more to it than that.
Oh, definitely. Alternate histories can challenge our perceptions, make us question our assumptions about the past and present, and even spark our imaginations to consider possibilities we might never have thought of otherwise.
And it's not a new concept either, right? The Wikipedia article mentions some early examples of alternate history going back centuries.
That's right. Even ancient historians dabbled in what-if scenarios. Livy, a Roman historian, pondered what might have happened if Alexander the Great had lived longer and turned his armies westward towards Rome instead of eastward.
Wow. So people have been fascinated by what-ifs for a long time.
Yeah.
But how did the genre evolve over time? Did it always focus on these big world-altering events?
Early alternate histories often explored utopian societies or idealized versions of the past. But as the genre developed, it started incorporating elements of science fiction, like time travel, parallel universes, and even concepts from quantum physics.
Quantum physics. Now that sounds a bit complex for a fictional genre.
It is, but it's also incredibly fascinating. There's this theory called the many worlds interpretation, which suggests that every possible outcome of a quantum event creates a new universe. So every time a decision is made, every time a coin is flipped, reality splits and a new universe branches off where things went a different way.
Okay, now my head is starting to spin a little. So basically every possible version of history, every possible outcome might be playing out somewhere in this vast multiverse.
Exactly. It's a mind-bending concept for sure. And it raises some pretty profound questions for alternate history writers. If every choice leads to a new universe, does that diminish the significance of individual choices? And does it even make sense to talk about a correct timeline if all possibilities are happening somewhere?
It seems like the more we delve into this, the deeper the philosophical rabbit hole goes. But let's step back for a moment and look at some more grounded alternate histories, the ones that focus on specific historical turning points.
That's where things get really interesting. Our podcast source, Back to the Past, dives into some really compelling what-if scenarios. One episode explores what might have happened if Constantinople hadn't fallen in 1453. Imagine a world where the Byzantine Empire survived and thrived as a cultural and political force in the region.
That's a big one for sure. How would that have changed things?
The ramifications for European and world history are huge. The Renaissance, the Reformation, the Age of Exploration, all of these events could have unfolded very differently. And the impact wouldn't be limited to Europe. The ripple effects would be felt throughout the world.
Wow. It's amazing to think about all the potential consequences from that one change. And I'm also really curious about their episode on what if the U.S. had remained isolationist after World War II? Would we have seen the same kind of Cold War? Would the world look very different today?
Those are the kind of questions that alternate histories encourage us to ask. It's not about rewriting the past, but about understanding how different choices might have led to different outcomes.
It's like holding up a mirror to our own world, but the reflection is distorted. showing us how things could have been, and by contrast, what makes our reality unique. So we've talked about the framework of alternate history and some real-world examples. But how does this all connect to that article about the U.S. Army? How do they use alternate history, or more specifically, counterfactual history?
It's not as strange as it sounds. The RAND Corporation, which conducts research and analysis for the military, uses counterfactual history as part of their Battlefield Futures program. They combine traditional battlefield staff rides with custom war games that incorporate counterfactual elements.
So they might have participants refight a historical battle like Gettysburg, but introduce technologies that existed at the time but weren't actually used, like balloons for observation or field telegraphs for communication.
Exactly. It's about exploring how those technologies might have changed the course of the battle, and more broadly, how technological advancements impact military strategy and tactics.
That's fascinating. So they're not trying to rewrite history or say what should have happened, but rather using these what-if scenarios to gain insights that could be applied to current and future military challenges.
Right. It's about extracting valuable lessons from the past, even if that past is a hypothetical one.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of alternate history, some real-world examples, and even touched on how it's used for strategic thinking. Now I want to dive into some of the famous works of alternate history, the kind that really captured the public imagination and made this genre popular.
Now we're talking about the what-if scenarios that have captivated readers for decades. And there are some recurring themes, particularly around major conflicts like World War II. One of the most iconic examples is Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle, which explores a world where the Axis powers won the war. What's interesting is that Dick even includes a double-blind what-if, where a character within the alternate history imagines a world more like our own.
Whoa, those layers of what-ifs within what-ifs really make you think. And there are so many other examples like Bring the Jubilee, where the Confederacy wins the American Civil War fatherland, set in a Nazi-controlled Europe, and The Years of Rice and Salt, which imagines a world where the Black Death wiped out most of Europe's population.
Each of these works takes a pivotal moment in history and twists it, leading to fascinating explorations of how societies, cultures, and even individual lives might have unfolded differently. And it's interesting to note that these scenarios, especially the ones about World War II, often reflect the anxieties of the time they were written in.
That makes sense. It's like these authors are grappling with the what-ifs that haunted their own present, using fiction to explore the darker possibilities of what might have been.
Exactly. The Man in the High Castle, for example, was published in 1962, right in the middle of the Cold War, and it reflects those anxieties about nuclear war and the potential for totalitarian regimes to dominate the world.
So alternate histories can be more than just escapism. They can also serve as a form of social commentary, a way to explore complex moral and political questions. It's not just about major wars, right?
No, not at all. Alternate histories can explore all sorts of turning points. Back to the Past has an episode on what if prohibition never happened in the United States. They discuss the potential impact on American culture, the rise of organized crime, and even the development of music genres like jazz.
Prohibition was such a fascinating and tumultuous period, and it's interesting to consider how things might have played out differently without it. That same podcast also has an episode on what if Al Gore won the 2000 presidential election. I can only imagine how differently the early 21st century might have unfolded.
Right, and they even explore more hypothetical scenarios, like what if the automobile never became the dominant mode of transportation? Imagine the 20th century without car culture, with cities designed around walking, biking, and robust public transit systems.
It's like they're encouraging us to step outside the familiar and imagine a world shaped by different choices and different technologies. Okay, so we've covered the basics of alternate history, some famous works, and even touched on how it's used for strategic thinking. But how does time travel fit into all of this? I mean, it seems like a natural tool for creating alternate timelines.
Time travel is a classic way to disrupt the flow of history and create those pivotal points of divergence. One of the earliest examples is Lest Darkness Fall, where a man travels back to ancient Rome and tries to prevent the fall of the Roman Empire.
That one's a classic.
Yeah.
And we see time travel used in so many other works, like Brooklyn Project, where time travel experiments have unintended consequences, and Making History, which plays with the idea of preventing Hitler's birth with some unexpected and thought-provoking outcomes. It seems like time travel in alternate history often raises questions about causality and the paradoxes of changing the past.
Absolutely. And it leads to this fascinating concept of the time patrol, a recurring theme where guardians try to protect the timeline from alterations, almost like a cosmic battle for the correct version of history.
But with the idea of the multiverse, that concept gets even more complex, doesn't it? I mean, if there are infinite universes where every possibility is playing out, Does the idea of a single correct timeline even hold up?
That's a great question. If every choice creates a new universe, the concept of a single correct timeline becomes much harder to define. And some authors grapple with this head-on. Terry Pratchett in Night Watch has a character who insists that certain events simply cannot happen even in an infinite multiverse. It's like there are still rules even in a realm of infinite possibilities. And then you have stories like Larry Niven's, All the Myriad Ways, where the realization that all choices have already been made leads to a sense of nihilism and despair.
That's a pretty dark take on the multiverse.
Yeah.
It seems like the more we delve into alternate history, the deeper the philosophical rabbit hole goes.
It's true, but I think that's part of what makes the genre so compelling. It's a playground for exploring not just historical possibilities, but also the fundamental nature of time, reality, and choice. It encourages us to ask big questions about how the world works and what our place in it might be.
Welcome back to our deep dive into alternate histories. We talked about how this genre often acts as a mirror, reflecting the anxieties of the time they were written in.
Right, like we're looking back at those what-ifs through the lens of a particular era.
It makes you wonder what anxieties our current alternate histories might reflect.
Well, one theme that keeps popping up is a concern about climate change and environmental disasters. I mean, Kim Stanley Robinson's The Ministry for the Future comes to mind. It's a pretty stark portrayal of a future ravaged by global warming.
It's definitely something that's weighing heavily on a lot of people's minds these days.
For sure. And while those scenarios are fictional, they definitely serve as a warning. A reminder that our choices today have consequences for the future.
It's interesting how a genre that's essentially about imagining what ifs can have such a powerful connection to real-world concerns.
I think that's part of what makes alternate history so compelling. It's a blend of fantasy and reality, where we can explore the endless possibilities of what if, while also reflecting on the complexities of our own world.
Okay, so we've touched upon the big picture anxieties that alternate histories can address.
Yeah.
But what about the more specific what-if scenarios, the ones that make you go, never thought of that?
Those are the real gems. The scenarios that shake up our understanding of history and make us reconsider events we thought we knew.
Like the one from the podcast, Back to the Past, about what if Constantinople hadn't fallen?
That's a great example. It's a scenario with massive implications. Think about it, a world where the Byzantine Empire not only survived, but continued to flourish as a cultural and political force.
It would completely reshape Europe as we know it.
Absolutely. The Renaissance, the Reformation, even the Age of Exploration, everything could have unfolded differently. And it wouldn't just be Europe either. The impact would be felt throughout the world.
It's mind-boggling to think about all the potential consequences stemming from that one change.
Right. It really highlights the interconnectedness of history. It makes you realize that even seemingly small events can have a ripple effect across time and space.
Speaking of thought-provoking scenarios, what about the podcast's exploration of a U.S. that remained isolationist after World War II? That feels particularly relevant today.
It does, doesn't it? With all the talk about nationalism and global power dynamics these days, it really makes you think about what the world would be like if America had taken a step back from international affairs.
Would the Cold War have played out the same way? Would we have seen a different balance of power emerge? So many questions.
And it challenges the assumption that American involvement always leads to a better outcome. It forces us to consider the unintended consequences of foreign policy decisions.
It's a reminder that things are rarely black and white in history, even when it comes to intentions and outcomes.
Exactly. And alternate histories can help us navigate those complexities. They encourage us to think through the potential ripple effects of different decisions and consider the possibilities that might have been.
So it's not just about rewriting the past. It's also about gaining insights that can inform our understanding of the present and even help us make better decisions for the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned earlier that a lot of alternate history scenarios focus on wars and politics.
Right. Seems like those are the big what-ifs that people tend to gravitate towards.
They definitely make for compelling stories. But it's important to remember that alternate histories can explore any aspect of human experience, from cultural trends to scientific discoveries.
Like that episode of Back to the Past about what if the automobile never went mainstream.
Exactly. Imagine a 20th century where cities were designed for pedestrians and cyclists, where public transportation was the norm. It really makes you think about how a single technological innovation can have a ripple effect on every aspect of society.
It's fascinating to consider those what-ifs that aren't necessarily tied to major historical events.
It just goes to show that alternate history is about more than just rewriting wars and elections. It's about exploring the full spectrum of human experience and imagining all the different paths we could have taken.
Speaking of paths not taken, what about the role of time travel in alternate histories? It seems like a natural tool for creating those what-if scenarios.
Absolutely. Time travel is a classic device for shaking up the established timeline and creating those pivotal points of divergence. It allows writers to explore those what-if moments where someone goes back in time and tries to change things.
We talked about some examples earlier, like Lest Darkness Fall and Making History, but there are so many other fascinating time travel stories out there.
Right, like Connie Willis's Blackout and All Clear. They're set during World War II and explore the challenges and ethical dilemmas of time travel. It's a really thought-provoking take on the genre.
Time travel always seems to lead to those mind-bending paradoxes and questions about causality.
It does, doesn't it? It makes you think about free will versus determinism. If someone goes back in time and changes things, does that mean our choices don't really matter? Or are we all just playing out a predetermined script?
Those are some deep philosophical waters we're wading into.
I know, right? But that's what makes alternate histories so intellectually stimulating. It's not just about entertaining stories, it's about exploring the big questions about time reality and the very nature of choice.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different aspects of alternate history, but I'm curious, what do you find most appealing about this genre? What keeps you coming back for more?
You know, for me, it's the sheer sense of possibility. The idea that history isn't fixed or set in stone, but is instead a constantly evolving story with infinite potential outcomes.
It's like opening a door to a world of what-ifs, where anything is possible.
Exactly. And each of those what-ifs is an invitation to imagine how things could have been different, to explore the paths not taken and consider the choices that shaped our world.
It's a reminder that the past isn't just a collection of dates and facts. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads, each representing a different potential outcome.
And by exploring those alternate threads, those paths not taken, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity and fragility of our own reality.
Well said. It's been a fascinating journey so far. But before we get too carried away with our time-traveling adventures, let's take a pause here. And when we come back, we'll wrap up our deep dives into a world of alternate histories. Welcome back to our deep dive. It feels like we've traveled through countless alternate timelines and explored some really mind-bending what-ifs along the way.
Yeah. It's amazing how much ground we've covered, from the basics of alternate history to its philosophical implications and even its real-world applications.
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is how alternate history highlights the complexity of causation. It's not always a simple cause and effect situation.
Right. It's about recognizing the interplay of so many different factors, choices, events, even chance encounters that shape the course of history.
It's like we're looking at this giant tapestry woven from countless threads, each representing a different potential outcome.
Exactly. And by considering those alternate threads, we get a sense of how fragile our own reality is, how even small changes could have led to drastically different outcomes.
It makes you realize that the present moment is just one possibility among many.
And that realization can be both humbling and empowering. Humbling, because it reminds us that we don't have complete control over the course of history, but empowering because it shows us that our choices still matter.
Even seemingly small decisions can have a ripple effect across time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's that classic butterfly effect, where a tiny change in the past can lead to massive shifts in the future.
It's almost like a chain reaction where one event triggers another and so on.
Right. It makes you think about all the choices we make every day and the potential consequences they might hold, both in the short term and in the grand scheme of things.
It's a reminder that history is a constantly evolving story, not a fixed and immutable set of facts.
And that's what makes alternate history so fascinating. It allows us to explore those possibilities that never came to be, those paths not taken, and consider what might have been.
It's also fascinating to see how alternate histories from different eras reflect the anxieties and preoccupations of those times.
Right. It's like those what-if scenarios are a window into the collective psyche of a particular culture. They reveal what people were worried about, what they hoped for, and what they valued.
Like those Cold War era alternate histories we talked about earlier, their themes of nuclear annihilation and totalitarian regimes.
Exactly. Those scenarios reflected the very real fears that people were grappling with at the time.
It shows how alternate history can be more than just entertainment. It can also be a form of social commentary, a way to explore complex issues and challenge conventional thinking.
And sometimes it can even have practical applications, like the U.S. Army's use of counterfactual history in their wargaming.
Right, they're using those what-if scenarios to learn from the past, identify potential challenges, and develop new strategies.
It's a testament to the power of imagination and how thinking outside the box can lead to valuable insights.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of alternate histories, what's the one key message you want our listeners to take away?
I'd say it's this: embrace the power of what if. Don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge assumptions, and imagine different possibilities.
Because those what-if questions can lead to some pretty amazing discoveries about ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly. So keep exploring those alternate timelines, keep asking those what-if questions, and who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to create your own alternate history.
Well said. It's been a fascinating journey through a genre that often gets overlooked for its depth and insight. But as we've seen, alternate history offers a rich and rewarding experience for anyone willing to take the lead.
So until next time, keep those imaginations running wild, and remember that in the world of alternate history, anything is possible.
This has been The Deep Dive signing off.